Welcome to Adapt It, the podcast where we explore adaptations of various forms. I'm today's host, Tom, and with me is...
Pat?
And KJ.
Today we'll be discussing Inverted Spaces by exploring James M. Cain's novel, Double Indemnity, and the Billy Wilder, Raymond Chandler adaptation of the same name. So, supposedly, James M. Cain's work was a model for Camus' The Stranger, and so it was a big influence, apparently in
Really?
France. Apparently it was. Yeah, I don't think any specific work, but just his style was a model for that. And so his work was very influential. But for people who know it, James Cain was the writer of Mildred Pierce, The Postman Always Rings Twice, today's work, Double Indemnity. His early novels had adapted well for the screen, especially in the 1940s, which is ironic because he had a very famous failure as a screenwriter. He tried to become a screenwriter and got nothing produced, but other people were able to produce his novels quite successfully. His novels are dirty, they're violent, and they're fast. And I have this quote here from Tom Wolfe about them, which I like, which is, quote, momentum, pure acceleration. That has to be pure Cain, because no one has ever pulled it off the way he does. Not Hemingway, and not even Raymond Chandler. Cain lets nothing get in the way of his pace. End quote. Now, I
Not
don't
even
know
good writing.
yeah, I will say yes, thank you. I don't know if I agree with Mr. Wolf, but yes, yes, nothing does get in the way of his pace. And today we're leaning into Double Indemnity, and this is obviously part of his early years with novels, as I mentioned before, Postman, Mildred Pierce, Double Indemnity. They're probably more famous because they were all adapted into very successful films multiple times, but later in his life, Cain kept writing. He was writing into his 70s and 80s. He never had the success he had in his early years. His novel sort of fell off. But this novel, Double Indemnity, and it's more of a novella, it's a little more than 100 pages long. It was initially published in Liberty magazine in 1936 in an 8-part serial. It was later republished in Three of a Kind as a novella. It's based on the 1927 murder of Albert Snyder, in which the lover of Snyder's wife and Snyder's wife conspired to kill Snyder. Cain at the time was working as a journalist, I believe in the New Mercury, that periodical, and he was attending the trial while it was going on. He was recording it, and that became the inspiration for this. This novel also served as the basis for the film of the same name, which came out in 1944, adapted for the screen by the novelist Raymond Chandler and directed by Billy Wilder. Raymond Chandler infamously hated the work of Cain, and I have a long letter to his publisher about his dislike of Cain, which we can cover later on. But what this movie does do, and what the movie follows the book with some exceptions and some important ones, but the general plot is an insurance salesman, Walter, played by Fred MacMurray in the film version. And Fred MacMurray was always more of a sunny character. He always played sunnier characters. Here he's playing a tough guy, which was unusual for him. He plays Walter Neff, an insurance salesman, and he meets Phyllis Dickerson, played by Barbara Stanwyck, who is unhappily married to Mr. Dietrichson, who's, I don't think we even get his first name. And she meets Walter. They fall for each other. They conspire to get Mr. Dietrichson to sign a life insurance policy. Then they kill him on a train because if you die on a train, it's double indemnity. There's a double payout of the insurance claim. The idea is this will happen, she'll get the money, they'll later run off together, etc., etc. Of course, there's complications. We discover Barbara Stanwyck is playing a femme fatale, surprise, surprise, and it goes from there. The book is hard and fast. The movie is a lot of fun, and there we go. That is Double Indemnity. Now, I called this episode, or came up with the idea of the name of this episode as Inverted Spaces, because up to this point, what we've had is a crime and then someone comes in and tries to solve it. Now, it might be a hard-boiled private eye, it might be Sherlock Holmes, it might be a mustache twirling Belgian, but crime, solve crime. That seems to be the model. This movie, as this book, opens with the criminal walking in and saying, I'm the criminal, I'm the murderer. Then we learn about the crime. Then later we kind of deal with the detective. But the detective, the investigator, whatever you want to call the detective, played by um, excuse me, Edward G. Robinson, an insurance investigator in this film, he's sort of secondary and he doesn't really do any kind of crime solving.
Well, we don't see him do crime solving.
We
He
don't see
does
it.
bring people in. He does
He
send
does
people, like he does
stuff.
research, but it
Yes.
happens off screen
It
for the
happens off
most part.
screen. Yeah, what we're getting then is an
And sort of
inversion.
what he does is he never really solves the crime though. Even in the book, he sort of thinks he does. He completely gets it wrong, but he thinks he solves the crime at least in the book. In the movie, he never actually he does figure out it's murder. It's more his actions cause the criminals to then eventually reveal themselves. But it's not that he ever actually comes out and has the big sort of Poirot reveal scene where he gets to say, "And it turned," he doesn't get to do that. It's
Mhm,
all his actions just as he puts pressure on it. If they didn't do anything, if they just stayed where they were, then they wouldn't get caught. That's the irony, is that they only get caught because they eventually turn on each other and reveal themselves. If they didn't, they wouldn't get caught.
mhm. Yeah. And so this is, I think, the first time we see this, where we're starting with the murderer, and then later we see the murder, and then after that we see the investigation.
Yeah, you
Um,
think you're getting that with the ABC murders in the book. You
mhm,
think you're getting that with the ABC murders, the book. That's what you think you're getting, is you're seeing the murderer actually commit the murders and then watching the detective actually catch them, and it's not what you're getting.
mhm. Yeah. So this is the first time we do that, and this is where we're moving away from mystery at this point and moving into strictly crime. We could say that's kind of true of Chandler, but Chandler, there's a mystery, and you get the end of the mystery at the end of the book, at the end of the movie. That's true, I think, of all Chandler's novels. I haven't read Playback, I probably won't, but I think that seems to be kind of the case there. It's sort of true of the Maltese Falcon. We You can kind of infer who did it, but at the end we figure out who actually killed Archer, and we go from there. This is the first time where the crime is the central thing. The mystery itself is it's relevant as it puts pressure on the characters we're following, but it's not a mystery. We know mostly everything. There's some details we find out about the femme fatale lead, but this is kind of new. This is where we're moving from kind of detective fiction into crime, I think, where that's the stress, not solving it, not putting the pieces together, but crime itself. And as we saw with last week, looking at the work of Chandler, Chandler opens the door for this, and Dashiell Hammett opens the door for this, where they're giving crime back to the criminals. And Kane and then his adapters are, I think, stressing that in a little more detail. I was going to say take it to the next level, but I don't think that's quite right. I think Kane is maybe a little more pulpy, maybe a little more than a standard pulp writer, but that's where we are. And that's something I want to talk about, as well as also something we need to touch on, which we haven't yet, which is the femme fatale character. This is a great movie to introduce the femme fatale into our series. And I'll start with just asking you guys, what did you think about the book and movie?
So I've watched it many, many times. I remember the first time I actually ever watched it, I know where I was even. It was in London actually. Because I had asked one of my high school professors, because it was when the that video game LA Noire came out, which was pretty meh. It was pretty, as the kids would say, pretty mid. But it was like I did that, yeah.
That's one of my favorite slang of the next
Yeah.
generation.
Yeah, it's pretty good. So I mean, it was fine, but there were ads for it everywhere. Like it was, they were making like a huge, Rockstar Games was making a huge push for it. And I was thinking, I'm like, oh, I should watch some more film noir. I really want to watch more film noir. So I asked my college professor, and he told me to watch. Um, Double Indemnity was one of the ones on his list. So I sort of downloaded it probably on iTunes, because you could get people watch movies on iTunes then. I don't think they do that anymore. Um, but I watched it like on my laptop, and I remember watching it. And it is a really great movie. And then I went and got the book and read the book. The book is very different. It's interesting, it's especially doing it this time because I don't think I've watched them like back to back. I don't think I've watched the book, read the book, and then watched the movie right away before. It's definitely, I mean, it's more, the movie is definitely more poetic. Like you can see Chandler sort of in there, he's all over the place. Like usually with these kind of books from this time period, so much of them are just lifted, just huge chunks of the dialogue are just lifted directly from the books. This doesn't do it that much. There's a little bit like Edward G. Robinson has his one speech about, I've got books on this kind of suicide and, broken down by race, by color, by this, by time of the year. That's actually lifted directly, but most of it's not. And you get it. I mean, if you go back and look at that book, he's not a very good writer of dialogue. Like it's very plain. It's kind of boring. If you spoke it, it's not all that interesting. Whereas this is just, there's some great lines, even like after when Huff is leaving after he's committed the murder and he says, I couldn't hear my footsteps. I was a dead man walking. Like that's a great, that's kind of a cool image. And so he's very good with the actual dialogue is much snappier. It's much more interesting to hear than the novel is. The novel isn't all that literary, as one would kind of say. Like it's not a particularly, which, I mean, in a good way and a bad way. Like it's not a particularly it's not overwritten. It's sort of a little underwritten, if anything. You read Chandler likes his, he gives a lot of information about the scene and the mood and the place. Kane doesn't really do that. It's a lot more plain. Is probably his most literary thing is when he's describing, I think she's Nerdlinger in the, which that's not a surprise to change her name. So she's Nerdlinger in the in the book. And she is sort of, she gets described a lot in the book as being like an embodiment of death, and she's going to go to she really should be marrying death. And so at the end of the book, she goes to marry death.
Mhm.
And so that's his most like sort of literary motif, kind of his artsy moment. But it's a very sort of plainly written book. So it's interesting to see what Chandler did with it. Now he also changes a lot of the relationships, I think, and he does kind of change the central focus. We'll probably get to that later. But it's a very different, it's probably of the ones we've seen, it's the one that's the most recognizable in its adaptation and yet also really different. It's the way it's written is very different in the movie than it is in the book, but they're still easily recognizable as one coming from the other. It's not like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory where you're kind of like, huh, they changed a lot of random stuff in here, like we did last year, and like they've added whole new scenes and changed every, like, I don't know why they would do that. It does follow plot wise pretty closely, but the whole focus gets changed. And it's interesting to see what actually gets changed because of what they rewrote in the film. KJ, what about you?
My library has Friday matinee movies, 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday, and I always wanted to go. And I looked at what the schedule was, and Double Indemnity's coming up, and I knew we were doing it for the show, so I'm really excited. I'm finally going to get to go to the library to watch one of these movies. Who goes to the library at 2 o'clock on a Friday to watch these? I was interested in who the crowd's going to be, what's the setup going to be like. Right? This is a strange, silly thing, but all right. So I get to the library around 1:55, 1:56, and there's little signs, arrows, Friday matinee movie, this way, this way, this way. And then eventually they get to a door that's closed that says library personnel only. I'm like, oh, maybe I'm too late. Like, they don't let people in after, I don't know, like the door's closed. So I went and asked the librarian, I said, hey, are they doing the movie today? And he's like, yeah, they'll set it up soon. So I went and sat over there, and this young kid, I don't know, maybe in his 20s, and another couple, maybe in their 50s, walk into the room. So I follow them in. They have a projector, a screen, a sound bar, and 4 seats set up. So I don't think very many people come to these Friday matinee movies. It takes them just about 10 minutes to get the sound bar to produce sound. Okay? Movie starts, and I can't understand a word they're saying. It's just impossible to understand the dialogue. The other couple that's there, she says, do you mind if I go ask them to turn it up a little bit? I said, oh, I'll figure it out. So I go up to the sound bar. I try to turn it up. The volume's on max. I'm like, you can ask them, but the volume's on max. I sit back down, and she's, and she goes, maybe we'll put on the subtitles. Good idea. The problem was the room was a painted cinder block room, like my high school. I don't know if your high school was like this. So there was just echo in the room. So my first experience with Double Indemnity was through subtitles, which is an awful, terrible way to experience Double Indemnity. It was one of the worst movie watching experiences
Yeah,
I've
that's
ever
it's
had.
pretty bad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
Mhm.
it
the
was
whole
awful.
point of it is like the snappiness of the
Right?
dialogue
Mhm.
and that sort of
Yeah,
like
back and forth.
yeah, the
Hey,
back and forth. Hey,
the liquor cabinet's locked. Don't worry, I carry my keys. Like
Uh,
all
I love that
oh my
the
god,
line.
yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's a great. That is. I mean, again, that's not in the book. That's a great line. Don't
That's
worry,
a
I carry my
Chandler.
keys.
That's
Yes,
Chandler. Yeah.
yes.
Mm.
But so I did not enjoy the first watch. I a week later or so I watched it again on the laptop with the headphones, and that was much better. But guys, I think I'm starting to get a little detective story down. I know we're only on the fifth episode, but
Mm.
oh.
Uh-oh.
How about you, Tom?
Jinx for you.
What's your experience with Double Indemnity like?
So I saw this movie when I was a teenager, very young. I only read the book for this episode. It's my first. No, no, I'm sorry, that's wrong. I read through the early Kane novels. I read through all the ones that Library in America put together. They have an edition, and I read through that edition.
They have Kane? I thought they just have the crime novels one. They have a Kane one
I
specifically?
thought they had a Kane one. I could be mistaken, but I've read
They have a
Mildred.
crime novels one. They have a crime novels of the
They,
40s and 50s that has some Kane
yeah.
novels in it, yeah.
Okay. I didn't read that because I didn't read. What's the one that recently adapted with Bradley Cooper? They
Talented Mr. Ripley?
No, 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 no. They adapted a noir that's in that one in the Library of America, but with Bradley Cooper.
Oh, the Nightmare Alley?
Nightmare Alley?
Nightmare
Nightmare
Alley,
Alley?
yes.
Yeah,
Nightmare
Nightmare Alley's
Alley's
great.
in that, and I know I haven't read that. So,
C.S.
um,
Lewis's wife's ex-husband.
yes, I yeah. But I've read through a lot of the Canes early. So I've read Postman, I've read Mildred Pierce, I've read Double Indemnity before, and I read one other one. I don't remember it. Kane never lasted with me. But I've also watched the movies. Like I've watched the famous Kane films, including this when I was a teenager. And I like this movie a lot, and I haven't visited it in a number of years. And I just watched it again for this episode. And I read the book again, and it was, as you said, Pat, it's a very plain book. It gets to the point. It doesn't necessarily feel any need to tell you why this man is doing this, other than he wants money, he wants the woman. He doesn't seem to feel guilt until he starts romancing the daughter of the man he murdered. Then he kind of feels guilt, and then he starts to act morally. You could chart possibly a moral evolution of the main character, but that would be too much work, and I don't think the author or the reader is expected to do that. So it's a very, very plain book. Um, the movie, though, it's so snappy. There's so much in the Library of America, to speak of them, published the Chandler screenplay of it, the Chandler Wilde screenplay of it.
For the audience at home, both Pat and Tom are holding up the screenplay, I think, of the
Yes, we
book
both are.
Yeah, yeah, it's
with
the
a very
Library of
smug smile on
America,
their face.
the late novels and late works of Raymond Chandler. They have two Raymond Chandler, I think, Library of America volumes, and this is the late one. And so I got that, and that's really the difference. I mean, the screenplay snaps. It's so much fun, especially the beginning. I think it becomes less so later on. And I would say the ending,
Maybe because Chandler was so drunk he couldn't finish it.
yeah, yeah.
Apparently he was a nightmare to work with.
Oh, was he?
Oh yeah, apparently Billy Wilder's next movie was The Lost after he finished this one was The Lost Weekend, which is about an alcoholic writer because he was so tired and just was like wanted to do a film basically based on he sort of based it on Chandler because because he hated doing it so bad. And I can't remember if it was this one or he Chandler wrote another screenplay called Blue Dahlia, which was the only like direct screenplay he wrote. Just fine. It's not a great movie, but it's fine. And I can't remember whether it was this one or that one where he was so drunk that the studio was just sending doctors to him to give him like sort of just like glucose injections and IV drips to keep him awake long enough to just write the script and finish it. He was such a wreck. He hated Hollywood so much, and he
No.
couldn't. He was just struggling to write these screenplays. Wrote great screenplays, but he was a total wreck. So he maybe by the end of it, they were They were just trying to get him out the door.
So last week we had William Faulkner who was writing noir. This week we have Raymond Chandler who's writing noir. William Faulkner also struggled a bit with booze and hated Hollywood as well. But oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize they did not like each other, Wilder
Oh
and
yeah,
Chandler.
apparently it was a nightmare.
Yeah, and Chandler hated the work of Kane. And I have a letter here that I don't know if this is appropriate time to read part of it, but it's so funny of Chandler just taking down Kane. Um, but there's some important differences, and as you mentioned before, Pat, which I think maybe we can get into that a little bit. One of them is the ending is different, very different in the book than in the movie, and I think that's something to talk. Also, the relationship between Walter and the daughter of the man he murdered is somewhat different, I think, and it's a it's a little stressed differently, as well as the relationship between the daughter and the PhD in chemistry boyfriend, which I appreciated that in
That did not
exchange.
come across very much in the
It
movie,
doesn't come
but
across in the movie.
it's mentioned. But yeah,
Yeah, but in the book, in exchange for a car loan, he gives the guy a copy of his dissertation. Which is it made me laugh so much that anybody would want someone's dissertation as a present. That sounds like an extra burden to put on someone. But anyway, regardless, um, those are some of the differences. And I think the ending is pretty important to talk about that difference because it is really different. And it's the most, as you were saying, Pat, it's the most literary Kane actually gets. That ending actually is sort of poetic and it's interesting, while the rest of the book isn't. And one of the things I struggled with, which I didn't with the movie, is Walter's character. Walter's character, he seems to in the book just do things because the author needs him to do things. He's ready to get on board with the murder almost instantly. There's no kind of moral qualm there. And it's only later he has moral qualms because it serves the plot a little bit. So that's an important difference. But I think the ending's a big difference, and I think the ending's a big difference, especially when we consider the female lead, Barbara Stanwyck's character, who is um, really, really compelling. And do we want to move into her character? What she brings to the table that's interesting, the difference between the ending of the book and the ending of the movie? Where do you want to go? Let's talk about the ending, the difference in the endings. The ending in the movie, Walter confesses everything, and he basically says, "Give me 24 hours. I want to run to Mexico." Right before then, Phyllis, the Barbara Stanwyck's character, had shot him. He had shot her and killed her. And then in the end, we see him kind of collapse onto the ground as he's leaving the insurance company. So,
somebody moved the elevator 3 miles away.
yeah. Yeah. There's Chandler again. In the book, the insurance investigator allows the two of them time to get away, and he kind of gives them tickets on a boat to Mexico. And so the female lead,
Nerdlinger.
yeah, Nerdlinger, Phyllis, and then Walter, they're both on the boat together. They meet there and they decide they're going to drown themselves. And so she kind of
It's
dressed.
not that they decided they're going to drown themselves. They decided to feed themselves
Oh,
to the
thank you.
sharks.
Yes.
Quadruple indemnity.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
It's a very rare insurance clause.
Yeah, they're gonna kill themselves by feeding themselves to the sharks. And she sort of dresses up like how does he describe her? Like a
I mean, it's essentially like bride, doesn't he say?
yeah, yeah, and with her like she looks like a bag of meat, he says, because her arms are exposed in the
Oh,
dress
I don't
she's
remember
wearing.
that. Yeah.
It's yeah, it's very creepy, and it's a really, really compelling ending. I mean, it's the first time the that he seems to be doing something with the prose is right at the end, and it's a huge difference. There's one critic I was reading, and I'll as we're talking, I'll try and find his name. It's not on the top of my head, where he describes Kane as sort of giving Phyllis the agency back, as opposed to in the movie where she's shot and just gotten rid of. Um,
So are we supposed to be rooting for Walter. I feel like my aunt. I was not rooting for Walter at all
No,
in this movie.
I don't think you're
My
supposed to.
aunt semi-famously didn't like Ferris Bueller because he should have gone to school. Like kind of. So I kind of feel that way with.
Mm,
Like maybe I missed the
mm.
point here, but
It's a better criticism than my college professor who just thought that he was like he skips school and does all these boring things. Nothing that he does is very exciting. If you're gonna skip school, at least do something fun. Like, I don't know. I thought he had fun.
Seemed to be having a good time.
he was
Yeah,
in a
it seemed to be.
Yeah,
parade.
Yeah, he like got to sing in a
he
parade. He got to
stole
be
a
at a baseball
Ferrari,
game.
right,
Yeah,
at one point? Or was
yeah.
it a
Like I don't know.
Porsche?
It seemed like he had a pretty
Had to act like
entertaining
the
time.
sausage king of Chicago. Like,
Uh, yeah, but yeah,
But no, I don't think you're supposed to. I don't think you're supposed to root for him.
no.
I don't think you are at all.
so they almost get away with it in the book.
The implication in the book, so in the book it's basically like the insurance agency covers it up because they basically admit that if this ever comes out, that the insurance company will go out of business, because who would ever buy insurance from somebody if their agents are killing people? So the
Committing
insurance agency
fraud.
just wants to cover it up. But Keyes says pretty clearly, Keyes doesn't tell him that she's going to be on the boat. He just tells her that he's going to get her, and he says, you can go. And she, and Walter says, well, what happened to Phyllis? And he basically says, don't worry, we took care of her, and that's it. And then he gets on the boat and sees that they're both, and he says, so you're just going to let me go? And he goes, I have a feeling I'm not actually letting you go. I have a feeling you're gonna, you're gonna take care of this yourself, or something like that. And then they get on the boat, and he sees that that Keyes has sent them both on the same boat, and realizes that, oh no, he knows we're going to kill ourselves. He knows we will. He knows once we get the two of us together that we cannot be together, and we'll either kill each other. One of us will either kill each other, or one of us will kill one, and then we'll still go to prison, or we're going to kill ourselves. He knows they will not be able to keep the two of them together. Um, he sort of does send them away with the knowledge that this will never work out, and that then their
It's a
problem will
dead
go away.
end,
Yeah, that it's
right?
a dead
That
end.
that trolley is coming to an end.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly. So in the book, yes, he lets them go, but in a way that he knows they will take care of the problem themselves, I think, is sort of the idea. I think, especially in the movie, you're meant to cheer for Keyes, and you're meant to feel really bad at the end that his sort of surrogate son betrayed him. Like, I don't think you're meant in any way. I think you're meant to feel bad for him. I think you're meant to really dislike eventually the Dietrichson. I don't think you're meant to like her at all. Like, she basically, the idea is she just manipulates everyone into just murder, 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 and she just gets a new person to just murder the next person to murder the next person. And so she just kind of has this train of murders going. The book makes it much clearer that she's done this a lot. The book also says she's murdered like 3 children at one point in order, because she needed to kill one child and in order to get an inheritance, and so she murders 3. She's a nurse at a children's hospital, and so she murders 3 of the children so that they won't suspect that, like, why one of them died. So she murders 3 of them so she can inherit from one of them. So she's like
She's a monster.
constantly, yeah, she is constantly murdering people.
She murders the wife as
She
well.
murdered the wife too.
Hmm.
That's in the movie, at
Yeah.
least. They do make that is in the movie. It's a little different, the circumstances, but it is there that she does. She just keeps finding ways to murder people. And so, the idea, I think, and to your point, Tom, I think that's sort of the ending is a little. This is a Chandler thing, I think, is that Chandler, and this I said this on the last podcast. I really think this is true. And again, this is from some critic. It might even be the same critic, because I've heard that one before about how he gives the agents, like in Kane's novel, she has the agency and kills herself at the end. Chandler won't even give her the agency to kill herself. He's like, nope, I'm going to have my male character is going to kill the femme fatale. He will not even give the woman any agency there. And part of it is, again, I think for Chandler, meaningful relationships are between 2 men. Like he sees sort of he is sort of misogynistic. He sees women as sort of manipulative. And so for him, the primary relationship is between Keyes and Huff, and she destroys that relationship. That's why you're meant to hate her and feel bad for Huff, because Anne Keyes. You're meant to feel bad because she is the one who destroyed this relationship between these 2 guys.
Yeah, because yeah, as you're saying, they're father son. That's it. And in the book, this is excuse me, not in the book, in the movie, that's why he wants to draw Huff in as his surrogate or underling or whatever
His
it is.
replacement
Yeah,
eventually. Yeah, he
eventually
wants him to be his
replacement.
assistant,
Yeah,
eventually be his replacement.
yeah, because he's he's kind of the smartest person in that office or whatnot.
And then I realized maybe you're not the smartest. Maybe you're just the tallest.
Yeah.
So talking about those two, another strange thing that happens in the movie is Walter shows up at work, and I don't know, a secretary or somebody says, "Hey, Keys wants to talk to you." He goes into Keys' office, and then the scene is so that we understand who Keys is. He figures out that that guy's truck was lit on fire by the guy, and then the guy leaves, and then he's like, "All right, get out of here, Walter."
Yeah, I noticed
Mm.
that too.
It was like, you called him in,
Mhm.
like, give us a throwaway line or
Mhm.
something.
I think I agree. I noticed that too. I think, and I hadn't noticed that before. I think it's either supposed to be that, oh, because he sold the policy to the guy, so I think it's supposed to be like, oh, if Keys
Mm,
needed him, he wanted him there so that he could be there to hear this guy. Um, or I think the other implication is also just that Keys is so like focused on individual things, he just didn't. He kind of forgot what he'd asked him to come in for.
Mhm.
Is sort of the idea
could
that
be.
he's got
Yeah.
like this one track mind, and once it's on that track,
Mhm.
once he's on that one track mind,
Mhm.
he doesn't sort of get off it. I don't know, but I agree. It's that's sort of like I was like, why did you ask him to go in there? You didn't ask him to do anything.
We
What?
needed the camera to follow Walter to give an intro to
Mhm.
Keys. So,
Yeah.
hmm
Yeah, and Keys is a lot of fun. I think just because Edward G. Robinson has the role, um, and it is odd. He kind of figures out it's a murder, but he can't put the last pieces together. And I guess he is the heart of the movie, like you're saying, Pat. Uh, but at the same time, I don't know. Were you hopeful that Walter in the book? I don't care, but in the movie, there is a part of me that kind of wants Walter to sort of walk away from it, but her to take the blame or take the heat or get thrown down. They do a much better job of giving him some kind of character, even though he doesn't really have any kind of redeeming traits. One of the things I struggled with in the book is that he's kind of worse, right? He has no real reason to do this except for the money. And then he starts, and they don't have this as much in the movie, but in the book he really starts to fall for the daughter, for Lola. And he starts kind of romancing her, and it's a little confusing also who she feels for. She seems to feel for the chemistry PhD more than for Walter. But it seems like he in the book, why he comes clean is he doesn't want Lola, the daughter, to be blamed for the murder. It seems like potentially that could be the case, that she's blamed for this. And so that's why he comes clean in the book. And so he's really, really, really hard to. It's a he's a real hard character to read through because it's a first person perspective, um, and it does make the book a little bit almost distasteful to read. I mean, Chandler described it as what does he say? He says, uh, Hemingway with his eternal sleeping bag got to be pretty damn tiresome, but at least Hemingway sees it all, not just the flies on the garbage can, which I think is a great way to describe this novel. But yeah, I had a little more sympathy maybe for Walter, but yeah, it's
I don't know. I mean, I think at least partly when I first saw it, not knowing how it was going to end, and again, the movie is different from the book, but I think that you're not necessarily rooting for him to get away with it, like get the money and run away with, Phyllis. But I think what you're hoping is sort of that he's just gonna walk away and make amends
mhm,
for it. Like I think that's the best you're hoping for, and maybe that he'll somehow get Dietrichson, Phyllis, arrested for the crime, or she'll pay for it and hit, with by going to prison or with her life or whatever, and that he will maybe be able to turn it around and redeem himself. Like I think that's the only thing you're kind of hoping might happen, but it's not. Like I think you
mhm.
sort of know
Yeah.
when you're watching it, like this is there is no way, because you can just because you can kind of follow it logically, like how could he ever do anything to her without her you know doing something back to him.
Mhm.
And the only thing you can hope is, oh, maybe he can kill her. And then, but his whole plan to kill her is to get, like, at least in the novel, he's trying to get the PhD student arrested for her murder. Like, he
Mhm.
has no, he's no sort of scruples about it.
Mhm.
So you can see that there's no way out for this guy at this point. So I don't, I guess that's the only thing you could maybe say you're rooting for. But I don't think you're definitely not meant to root that he gets the money and runs away with it. It's not like, I think that's a really, there are, I think, modern films that have a bit more of that cynical attitude, that are like, well, they should get away with it because he's a, the Dietrichson was a bad husband and he beat his wife, so it's okay that they murder. They would make a much more stronger case that he's a bad husband and that they have to do this thing. Um, Almost like that song, like, Phil had to die or whatever that song is. There, but there's this, there's like a country song about, like,
I don't know.
Earl, that Earl had to die. It's like a country song, but it's about these people who go and murder this woman's husband. And you're in that song, you are 100% meant to root for these women who are going to murder Earl. And I think that's a much more cynical modern attitude. I don't think that's there, that you in no sense are meant to root that Walter will run away with Phyllis and get the 50 grand, and that they will, go live in Mexico, like the end of Shawshank Redemption. Like, I don't think you're meant to see that.
Mhm.
Guantanamo or whatever it was.
Mhm.
You're not meant to do that.
Mhm.
But I do think the best you could say is you're meant to hope that he might redeem himself. And maybe, he won't have to go to prison for it, or,
Something like
something like
that.
that. That's something like that.
Mhm.
But I definitely don't think you're meant to sort of root for
Yeah.
him in a traditional sense.
Mhm.
I think I'd compare it to Catch Me If You Can.
Yeah,
Mhm.
With
That's
right,
good.
and that one you're
you're
rooting for
rooting for him.
Leonardo
Yeah.
Mhm.
DiCaprio for him to get away
Yeah.
with it, and you're not against Tom Hanks, but you're like, oh, what a stick in the
Mhm.
mud, like
But even something like, there's lots of crime, and usually they're not murder. Ocean's 11 is very
Mhm.
similar.
True.
oh,
You're
right,
meant to
right,
sort of watch
yep.
them and be, oh, that's so cool, how they got away with
Yeah.
it. It's not usually murder, because, usually it's, again, there's a little bit of cynicism to it. It's a little bit of Robin Hood kind of thing of, like, I'm gonna go take money from the rich people and,
Yeah,
give it to the,
the bad Andy Garcia rich
yeah,
people.
the bad Andy Garcia guy, or
Mhm.
even just the, with the Catch Me If You Can, where it's the poor kid who's just, he's only 17, and he's, he doesn't have any family, and, he's trying to make his way through life. Like, you're meant to sort of see these characters as sort of doing something noble, or sort of, even if misguided, good in the long run. But I can't think of anyone that does that with murder. Um, but I guarantee you there is one.
Yeah, it's
There
probably
is.
somewhere somebody's, yeah. Um,
Dexter, I don't know.
that's a
Dexter
little
is
bit,
actually a really,
yeah.
that's a good example of
Yeah.
something. Yeah, Dexter.
Mhm.
The only other one that came to mind, although it was a terrible movie, was that movie Double Jeopardy. I remember seeing that when I was like
Oh,
12.
yes.
Um, but
Yeah.
in the end, she doesn't murder him anyway. But you're
Mhm.
meant to root for her. You're meant to sort of be like, oh, she should totally get away with this
You get
murder.
it with revenge things. So I'm thinking of the Igmar Bergman film The Virgin Stream, I think it's called, in which you have, let me see if I could get the actual name of that. Um,
I think, but but I think you're right. Revenge is often one of the few cases where we say, okay, I'm
Murder
willing to
is okay.
watch someone commit murder, and I will root for that person to go commit that murder because it's revenge.
Mhm.
It's not,
Kill Bill.
yeah, Kill
Yeah,
Bill. I haven't seen it, but I think it's the
it's the same
same sort of
concept. We're going
idea.
to take out each man.
Yeah.
Yeah, The Virgin Spring is the name of the movie. Kind of a revenge plot, that type of thing. Yeah, and so there is nothing really noble, and I think it's what Chandler had a problem with in the book is that it's a very very cynical world of the book is incredibly cynical. It's just kind of gross, and he sees that, and I think he's right, as somewhat false, right? Like looking at the problems or the horrible people in the world and making that somehow a stand-in for reality is mm, is as fake as a Pollyannish version of things, right? Um, and I think you're right, Pat, by kind of buffing up the role of Keyes in this as sort of a pseudo father figure. That's what kind of does it. And I think Edward G. Robinson is very charismatic in the role, and he's a lot of fun. And so by putting that in the movie, even if it's not, I don't know if it's the heart of the movie or whatnot, but it's certainly the emotional and kind of moral compass.
Well, I think what it does is, because otherwise, you know, there's essentially the Walter character has nothing to, he's not betraying anyone, he's not really doing any other than, I mean, I guess he betrays his company. There's sort of this like,
Mm,
okay,
mm.
who cares,
Mm.
that's like Office Space when they try to steal the money, like
Nobody cares.
he's not really,
Mm.
he's not really betraying anybody. And I think that now there's an actual betrayal, like he has somewhat of a relationship, moral, social obligation here that he fails to meet, to live up to. Um, and I think that the movie also makes it a little clearer when they say, because and you can imagine this. I don't think the book has this, because he talks about, he's like, well, why, partially why did you do it? And he says, because I've always wanted to. He makes it clear. He's like all the time I sit there trying to think of how somebody else could game the system, and I think, you know what, I could do this too. I could game the system. And you can, in some ways, I will bet that was sort of Kane's attitude, because Kane worked in insurance. He was an insurance guy. And I bet he sat there the whole time trying to think of things, and he probably thought up a scenario exactly like this one, but not being a psychopath and murderer, he just wrote it. It's sort of this like, there has to be some sort of element where he probably thought, I bet if I could get this set up, I could get away with it, is what he's even thinking in his head. And I don't know, but I bet a lot of people who are in that scenario, who kind of live their whole lives doing that kind of thing, trying to catch people doing something wrong, think about how they could get away with doing the wrong thing too. And I think that's the motivation they give him in the movie. And sort of his real betrayal is the betrayal of Keys. That's where he betrays. He doesn't betray Dietrichson, and Dietrichson, I guess, sort of betrays her husband, but she clearly hates him anyway, and she's betrayed his wife and killed people before. So you have to have something that somebody sort of, it's they're not just doing these sort of terrible actions with no one who cares that they've done them. That, I guess, is the thing, is that in the book no one cares necessarily that he's murdered the father, except maybe the daughter whom he kind of has a relationship with later. That's the only one that would care that he's really done this thing, whereas in the movie, he, by doing this thing, he has betrayed his mentor. He's betrayed this guy that he says over and over again. It's like, I love you, Keys. He says it in the movie multiple times.
Yeah, and he does it in the book. And the relationship with the daughter is sort of shoehorned in there. It's not very convincing. And his affection for her is what causes him to turn himself in, and that's hardly convincing. So,
No, I just assumed when I read it, I'm like, oh, he's totally gonna just have her hang for it, isn't he?
yeah.
And then run away. When I read the book, I'm like, oh, this is different. He's totally gonna give her up.
Mhm.
I'm like, oh, he didn't. Why didn't he?
Yeah.
There was no reason.
Mhm. Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah. But do we want to move now into the femme fatale? So this is a character we've talked about before, Bridget in The Maltese Falcon, which we've covered that on our other podcast. We mentioned that book quite a bit last week, even though that wasn't the subject. Um, this, I think, in our season is probably the most famous and the most iconic femme fatale, Barbara Stanwyck's character. Um, and it's interesting. The femme fatale in this, and it's in the book, and I think she does a great job with it, is sort of closed off to us in a way, right? She can't be the subject of the film. We can't follow her perspective like we can with Fred McMurray. Um, in the book, it's a first person from Walter's perspective, and she's sort of in the dark. And it's really it's a really interesting character design to have this kind of psychopathic character that we're meeting at the beginning, and kind of the depths of her depravity aren't really clear until the end. And Bridget is sort of like that as well in Dashiell Hammett. And I'm wondering in some ways if this isn't the origin of the sort of the psychopath character that we see much later in crime novels. Is just this sort of completely alien psyche that's going on. In the book, we get that ending where she actually comes to Walter and says, you're the first person I loved. She does that in the movie as well. I don't know how convincing it is in the movie. I don't think she's telling the truth. In the book, she has no reason to lie at that point because she's decided that she's going to feed herself to the sharks and he's going to come along with her. Um, but that I think is what I found so kind of fascinating about the femme fatale. Uh, besides the arguments of her agency and what have you, which we can also talk about, is I think that more than a lot of other characters is sort of the origin of the cinema depiction of the psychopath, which is obviously very different probably from an actual psychopath, but I think that's where it starts with the femme fatale, just because it is complete. It's a person who's we discover their motivations, but they're sort of closed off to us at the same time.
I mean, you see it a little bit. M has it,
Hmm.
that's sort of M is sort of that character. I mean, it's more. I feel like in the earlier ones, it almost is like it's just they're just demonic.
Hmm.
There's almost this like
Yeah.
that's just
Hmm.
they're just evil people
Hmm.
and they're possessed by something. There is sort of this like sort of spiritual, just
Hmm.
corrupted state,
Yeah.
and that's sort of what they are. Whereas this is, you are getting more into a psychological kind of thing. That
Mm.
yeah, she's I mean, I love the best is when they're in the car and she honks the horn and he's breaking her neck and they only show her face
Hmm.
and she's got this like slight smile
Hmm.
that comes over. It's very creepy scene.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, the killer in M, he comes clean, and his coming clean involves saying, "There's just something that comes into me, and I have to do it, and I don't want to do it, but I have to do it." And so there is this pathetic quality to him. I think what's interesting about the Stanwyck character and other femme fatales is there's nothing pathetic about them. There is no lowering of them at any point until they're killed,
that's fair.
and even then, when they're killed, it's it's not go they're not going quietly into that good night, right? They are going to die with bullets and fire, and they're never going to admit they're wrong. Um, and I don't think you get that as much with the male characters. You get that with toughs, but the tough characters tend to not be the toughest characters who never admit fault tend not to be very interesting. I think of the like what's his name, the tough kid from the Maltese Falcon, who they decide they're going to set up for the murder. He never admits wrong either, but he's not that interesting a character. Like the male characters tend not to be as compelling if they're um,
Wilmer.
yeah, Wilmer, thank you. If they're Wilmer, they're not as interesting. But with the femme fatales, especially with her, it's that refusal to give over agency, to admit that she's lower than somebody else, to uh, to compromise her desires. That's really, really compelling, right? I don't get that with M. I get that with M is he wishes he could stop and he can't, right?
No, I understand.
Mm,
Now I get your distinction. I think that's a fair distinction.
yeah. And it's interesting that that kind of thing comes through the females. There's another version of Double Indemnity. Has either of you seen Body Heat? No, Body
We
Heat.
are shaking our heads.
Yeah.
I
You
forgot.
didn't hear that on his.
No.
Body Heat is a 1981 sort of version of Double Indemnity. It's a little different, with Kathleen Turner playing the femme fatale character. Um, and in that one, we're now gonna. Do you want me to spoil Body Heat? Uh,
You are more than
yeah.
welcome. I will not watch it.
Yeah.
Audience, if you were planning
Voice
on
from
watching Body Heat, skip ahead
Yeah.
30 seconds or
In
so.
Body Heat, he eventually goes to jail and she gets away with it. She gets the money and runs off, and we see her at the end on a tropical island. And so,
But see, that's kind of the cynical thing that I'm talking about. That's the cynical thing in modern films where they do that kind of thing.
yeah. Yeah, and that's a good point too. Yeah, her getting killed in some way or another, either through she's able to do it by feeding herself to the sharks, or she just gets shot. I guess is this kind of tragic thing of order is restored, right? The good wins out at the end, even if it only trickles out. Well, in this kind of modern, yeah, like you're saying, in Body Heat, it's the evil that wins. In the end, evil wins, and we just have what's his name, Kiss of the Spider Woman guy sitting in prison for the crime by himself. Um, so yeah, even in this kind of Kane world, even in Kane's world, as kind of as Chandler was saying, it's the flies on the garbage can. There is still a moral order that is restored.
I guess you don't feel that way at the end of that, though,
Yeah,
because they like,
I don't know. Do you feel
I
that
don't
at the
know.
end of like Macbeth though? Like the end of Macbeth, it's also pretty dismal.
Yeah, no, that's true. And even same thing for like Hamlet. No one's thinking like, Fortinbras will fix all this. Like,
Thank God Fortinbras
thank
is
God
king.
Fortinbras has showed up. That dude we all forgot about.
Yeah. If
Um,
you haven't read this play, you don't know who he is. If you're just watching it for the first time, you have no idea why this guy is here. Um, yeah, but I think it still follows that even though the main characters aren't heroic, they're cynical. I think it's still not in that ironic mode um, of evil wins out. I think we're still in the world of good can win out, even if we don't feel very good in the end of it, right? Even if we don't feel very good at the end of Maltese Falcon or this book, there is something that's preserved that's worth it. And in that sense, I think Chandler is the best person who's written about this, right? Because for Chandler, it's like as you're talking about Pat a lot, it's the good man has to go down into a bad place, and even though he's not bad, he still has to go there and do it. And even though you're not gonna fix the world, you have to keep trying. The world is gonna keep breaking, and you have to keep putting it back together. Um, and this book may be, and this movie may be that ethos stretched to the edge. If you pull on this anymore, it's not going to work. It's going to break, and you're not going to be able to put it back together. But there is, um, I guess it's odd that this inspired Camus because it's kind of Camus-y still, and that you still have to kind of put the world back together.
yeah, now I kind of want to read that with that in mind.
Yeah,
I never knew that.
yeah, I didn't know it either until researched it, or I was reading Tom Wolfe's essay on it, and Tom Wolfe was claiming that Camus and was inspired by Kane, and I think a lot of French writers were, and French filmmakers were as well. Like they love
It
noir.
explains why that book is on, like, because it's the. I mean, I like Postman, but Postman Always Rings Twice is on the Modern Library list of the 100 best
Mhm.
books of the century. I'm like, why? Like, it's fine,
Mhm.
but it's not one of the 100 best books of the century. But if it was, it might have had a lot more influence
Mhm.
abroad. It sounds like on writers of substance, and that might be why.
Why it has stretched, yeah. Yeah, and I think and that kind of style that it's inspired also inspired a lot of like French filmmaking. That kind of auteur style of the 60s. If you see movies like Godard's Breathless, which is basically the characters from a lot of this kind of noir stuff, but without the plot. They just took the characters and kind of plopped them in the middle of Paris and have them kind of wandering around talking to each other. Um, you know,
That sounds great.
it's actually pretty good. Yeah, I know that I don't really sell it there.
Sounds like a movie I want to go spend
Yeah.
12.50 to go see.
But yeah, I do think that it has that kind of. I think this is the point, and we'll talk, I guess, about a little about this more with next week when we do Chandler again. I think we're at the point here where I think we're at the point here where we're kind of turning over. We're going from a potentially hopeful mode to a pure cynical mode.
Do they have the supermarket scene in the book?
Do
Pretty
they?
sure they
If
do.
I saw somebody in the supermarket doing what they were doing, I'd be like, I guess they're LARPing. Like, they're like, what is this? Is
What is
ridiculous.
LARP?
Why
What
have
is
your sunglasses on?
LARPing?
Are you okay?
What is
LARP, like live action role playing.
oh,
Like they just wanted to feel cool in a supermarket. Be like, hey, we're gonna pass secret information back and forth over the tuna. Like it's just such a
I think it's
weird.
phone calls. I think she goes to
I
like the
think they do have a
drugstore.
scene though where they go. Don't they go somewhere and meet? It might not be that exact scenario. Um, it gets kind of again, it gets a little confusing because it does just start being like, and then this now they are being chased. Now they're not being tailed. Now
Mhm.
they are being tailed. And they called from here. I'm like, you said not to call, but and then they just like, no, it's okay to call now. I'm like, I don't get it. Um,
Yeah,
so I don't remember if
mm,
that exact scenario was in the book. I can't remember.
yeah, yeah. I do like that. That's a good point. It's like incredible. It's the most suspicious thing. Yeah.
The one lady's like, I don't know what you guys are doing, but can you pass me that thing up on the shelf?
He
Like,
passed me the baby formula, and I was also I'm like, lady, you could easily reach that down. Like you're
Yeah.
not like these shelves are just above eye level. Like I get it, you can't quite see it, but your hand can reach above your head. Like you could,
I didn't write the line. Give me the
Mhm.
formula. Like,
but I was like, dude, lady, you could have got
Mhm.
that. That was pretty obnoxious of you. Um, I also just like whenever I see those kind of things, you know that like I just imagine the filming of it because it's like it's often like a contiguous shot, so you know that like the actress or actor was like waiting in the wings and they're like go and
Yeah.
then like shoving them
Mhm.
out there. It's like all has to be timed right.
Mhm.
So I was like, man, that must have been an annoying film to see,
Yeah.
scene to film.
Not as annoying as the opening to Touch of Evil, I'm guessing, but
Yes.
yeah, it's still
Does that take place in a supermarket?
Touch of
What's Touch of
Evil.
Oh,
Evil?
it's the
It's a
best.
really good noir. I wish we were doing it, except it wasn't.
It's the last great noir. It's the
Yeah,
last great noir.
yeah. It's like the end of American noir is Touch of Evil. It's like 1958, I think. Um,
50, yeah, 58,
yeah,
57, something like that.
and it's the opening scene is a continuous shot for like a minute and a half, which ends in a car exploding. It opens with them putting, you see somebody put dynamite in the car, and then the camera moves back and goes onto a crane, and it just it follows this car, and you see different characters come in and out of the
And
frame, and the
and the car goes across like it goes through it's supposed to be going across the border, so it goes through multiple border checks. So they have to like show it and then it has to go like around a block and like around corners and it just keeps going and going and going and the scene just keeps getting filmed the whole way.
yeah, and
Um
you're just waiting for the
and apparently
dynamite to blow up.
yeah, but you know there's a bomb in the car. So you're watching this car and you're watching the people and you're just watching this contiguous shot of it moving. Um, and apparently it's Orson Welles who directs it. And apparently they spent like an entire night trying to get it. And then they finally got the entire sequence. And it's like there are so many people coming in and out. There must be 100 extras, and they all have to be perfectly timed as they like cross and like move this whole thing and to get this whole thing going. And apparently they did. They finally got everything to work perfectly and then got to the end and the guy who has a line at the very end right before the bomb goes off forgot his lines is like the border security guard or something and they basically were just like we're gonna go with it like we're just we'll have them add them in later so if you watch the guy's mouth saying something totally different but it's like no one's watching that just move on I'm not filming this again.
Yeah. But that's what I have for this. Any other closing thoughts on Kane, on Billy Wilder?
I wonder does because I haven't seen that many other Billy Wilder movies, but I'm like I've seen this and I've seen Sunset Boulevard. I'm like he seems to like to have the character reveal what happens to them
Mhm,
at the end of the movie and the beginning of the movie.
mhm.
Um, I don't know if he does that in his other movies, but
Let's see.
at least of those two,
Yeah, that's another good touchstone for this, because that's also another really good noir crime book, is crime movie rather, is
Sunset Boulevard. Yeah,
Sunset Boulevard. Yeah. Um, oh God, he lived to 2002, Billy Wilder.
he was also German, which I did not know until I
Mhm.
was looking this up. I did not realize he was German. He was friends with like Fritz Lang, I think, and all those guys. I was like, oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah, and it's kind of part of that. I mean, people have made this argument that that's where, and Otto Preminger also starts with the noir, where they just came over and they brought this sort of German sensibility with them. And even Orson Welles, who's doing this too, is taking all this stuff from like the theater, which is taking it from German theater. American theater is doing this, is taking it from German theater. So it's just like it's such a thing. Um, yeah, his other movies like The Apartment,
The Apartment,
Some
yeah,
Like
and
It
his other one is
Hot.
Lost Weekend. Is I've read the book Lost Weekend, but
Mm,
I've never seen the movie.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Sabrina. I think that's a pretty bad one. Oh God, Sabrina. Have you ever seen Sabrina?
no.
Oh
I've seen some episodes of Sabrina the Teenage
no,
Witch. Is it related?
it is not related. But it's Audrey Hepburn in a love triangle with Humphrey Bogart and William Holden. And it's one of these classic movies that everybody loves, and I don't know why. It's pretty awful. But yeah, I think Billy Wilder, outside of Sunset Boulevard, a lot of his movies are um, a little more hopeful, or a little more happy.
Lost Weekend is not.
Oh, fair enough. The Apartment's a little more pessimistic. The Apartment is about um, basically a Jack Lemmon is this guy who's a low-level guy in an office, and he basically lets his bosses take their mistresses to his apartment. So when they're cheating on his wife, they can use his apartment, and that's how he climbs the corporate ladder. And at one point, one guy, I think it might have been Fred McMurray, leaves Shirley MacLaine there, and she attempts to commit suicide, and that's the plot: is Jack Lemmon having to like help this woman recover in his apartment after having an affair with his boss. It's definitely worth watching. It's a little happier of a movie maybe than this, but maybe not by leaps and bounds. Yeah.
So I did want to mention the policy was worth 200,000. That's about 1.8 million in
Mhm.
2023. Just to give
Was it
a
worth
1.8
200 million?
It was
million.
100,000.
I thought it was
It was 100. It was
100,000.
50.
Well,
It was 50,000, and the doubling
oh,
was
oh, oh.
100,000. But it was 1.8 million. But it is 1.8 million.
Okay.
I did the math.
So
It is
my
1.8 million.
result was right. The math was wrong. But yeah, I just
Yes.
wanted to put it in
Hmm.
perspective. What was at stake?
Yeah. In the book, was it 25,000?
Yeah,
But
but the book was also 1935,
yeah,
so I
it's a
think when
little
they're doing it in the
earlier. Yeah.
19 little later,
Mhm.
although there wasn't actually that much inflation during that period,
No,
um,
not in the
but
30s.
for certain reasons, the 30s did not have high inflation, and the 40s at that point didn't either because they kept the prices down. But I think they probably wanted to raise the stakes a bit. I
Yeah.
think it was
Yeah,
like,
fair enough.
I think I remember looking it up when I was reading the book, and it was like 1.2 million in like 1935, and it was like 1.8 million or something like that
Mm,
in 19.
mm.
43 or whatever. So I was like, oh, they probably are trying to make it a little bit more worth it, I guess.
Yeah. Add another 600,000. If you enjoy Double Indemnity and are looking for more adaptations of Double Indemnity, check out the 1973 remake directed by Jack Smite and starring Richard Crenna, Lee J. Cobb, and Samantha Eggert. You could also check out the 1981 pseudo film version, Body Heat. You can rate and review this show anywhere fine podcasts are available. For those viewing in YouTube land, if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the Talking Studios channel for all our exciting content, and follow us on social media at Talking Studios. Check out other shows by Talking Studios, including Talking Pictures Trivia, where we explore movies through trivia, Keep Making Movies, where we explore micro-budget films, Limited Lexicon, where we play through text-based adventure games, and Get the Point, where we slowly reveal a movie poster and try to guess which movie poster it is. Got a question for us? Call the Talking Studios hotline at 201-467-8679 and leave a message. It may be featured on a future episode. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Adapted, wherever fine podcasts are found. Join us next time when we discuss Sunny Spaces with Raymond Chandler's The Long Goodbye and Robert Altman's 1973 adaptation of that book.
Wow, Talking Studios.
Next week we'll be discussing The Long Goodbye to explore Sunny Spaces. Pat, if you could adapt The Long Goodbye into any medium, what would it be?
So I'm just going to go with like a sort of traditional answer in an actual straight adaptation because especially from the Altman version, I think you could make a pretty good straightforward musical. Like I actually think
Oh,
like
yes.
not even an ironic like I mean the movie is ironic, but you could actually make a good musical out of it. I actually really think that could be something people would get into. It has all the elements for it. So like a lot of very discreet scenes, a lot of sort of even like the background characters, like you can absolutely see those like the crazy naked hippies across the way would have a number and it would be a show stealer. There'd be a lot of cool stuff. And it's like when they start stripping down and in the scene in the end where they were like, we're gonna take all our clothes off. That's a brilliant musical number at the end. There's a lot of really good musical numbers. That's what it would be, and it would be a really good one.
Yeah, but even like the song, The Long Goodbye, da 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 da. Yeah, that could be a little theme throughout it. Excellent.
Yeah, that would be a leitmotif.
A
I think is the
leitmotif, yes.
leitmotif.
Which it
I
kind
think
of
is the official.
works as
Which
in
it
this
is.
movie. Yeah, yeah.
Which
So
it
it already is
actually
that.
is.
Yeah, but it would be more pronounced, I guess. Yeah,
Yes.
sure. Great. How about you, KJ? Do you want to go next?
Yeah, this is a bit of a repeat audience. I did this for Sherlock, but Ross's dad is the star of this movie, so get hyped for seeing him in the 70s. I'm just picturing a Friends episode where he says, the 70s weren't exactly a walk in the park, and they cut to a scene from this movie where he's got to, like, shoot down a bunch of people. And Monica and Ross look horrified, like, oh my gosh, 70s were crazy.
Mhm.
But that's not really a good one, audience. That's not what you come here for. You come for
Well,
new
you do have
stuff.
Chandler Bing. So you have,
Yeah,
as we
the Ring. Yeah.
mentioned, Raymond Chandler Bing.
Raymond Chandler Bing. And Pat, could you be any more noir as you
Could you? Could we be any more noir?
But again, audience, that's a repeat. So I want to tease something. Next week, I'm going to throw out to the group that there is a movie that I think might be a modern noir. And I'm going to throw it out there next week. So stay tuned to next week to hear the movie that I'm thinking might be a modern noir.
Ooh.
How about you, Tom?
I think I would adapt this into a law firm that specializes in divorce. That would be my adaptation.
Can you elaborate?
Not really, no. No, it
No
would just
divorce
be,
stuff. No
yeah,
divorce stuff.
no divorce stuff. That's true. Marlo never does
That would be
divorce
the
stuff,
irony.
but we do. Yes, the long goodbye would be a group of lawyers who specialize in divorce. We make it as long and as painful for your former spouse as possible. It's a new form of cruel space that we inflict into the world. So yes, that would be my law firm, were I ever to become a lawyer, which I never should.
Sounds awful, Tom.
Yeah, sorry. That wasn't very funny. That was just sad. uh,